beginning, doctor. Tell me what got you interested in a career in medicine, particularly pediatric neurosurgery?
Yeah, well, a career in medicine, I guess, is a wider question. Which my dad's a doctor, and so I grew up sort of around medicine and hospitals, and we lived in hospital accommodation throughout my childhood. So I was always surrounded by hospitals, patients, going on ward rounds and stuff with him, and joining in and seeing the patients. And sort of, I think when you're surrounded by that background, it almost becomes part of your life. As for most doctors, it becomes part of my life as well as the child as well. And then I toyed with other things, but I decided to go for medicine in the end. I was toying with doing physics and astronomy and astrophysics and all kinds of very different things, but ended up going for medicine, essentially because my dad said, well, actually my dad said I should be a lawyer because he said I've got a big mouth and like arguing with him all the time. But I ended up going for medicine, and the good thing about medicine, of course, is there's a career for everybody in it. And so as I was doing it, I was directed towards neurology initially, so medicine of the brain, and that's where I was going. But after I saw neurosurgery, the more hands-on side of the brain, and looking after the brain, that's what really got my combination of the fascination of the brain activity and neurology, and the ability to get quite a rapid response. So it's interesting because many parts of medicine, so for example, if you're a GP or if you're looking after people with more chronic diseases, you have to treat them for a long time before you see them get better. And that's very important. But what I realized was I really preferred the immediate feedback that you get from doing an operation and seeing the patient get better, either in the operation or immediately afterwards. And so when you've got that, that's what really drew me towards surgery rather than the medicine side.
And pediatric surgery, isn't it? That's really fascinating.
Yeah, so it's pediatric neurosurgery. So I only do the brain and the spine for children. Yeah.
I remember reading a lovely line of yours in an interview where you mentioned you're an ordinary person doing extraordinary things. And the
Yes.
danger is when you begin to believe you are an extraordinary person. Have there been moments when you have thought you were almost extraordinary, doctor?
Yeah, inside there are, of course. And you have to have, it's a balance. You have to have a confidence level to allow you to do what we do. The last thing you would want going in for an operation is a nervous, sweaty looking surgeon sort of reading a book and, feeling anxious about the operation. So you need to have a certain level of self-confidence to be able to go in and do what we do to patients, and in particular, I think, to do those to children with the unwritten contract that we make with the parents to say that we will look after their children with everything we've got. And so you've genuinely got to believe that you can do that better than everybody else, because otherwise you should give the patients to somebody else to do the work. But then it's a fine line before that jumps into arrogance or taking risks with patients. So kind of need to be at the top level of normal confidence, but not becoming self-aggrandizing.
But how do you manage to stay grounded and not allow the kind of success that you have had go to your head?
Yeah, that's kind of it's a balance between good and bad. The bad bit is, unfortunately, you're grounded quite often when your patients do not do well. And so you are frequently reminded that actually, you know what, there are things that we can't fix, however much we might try. And that's a sort of a more depressing way of staying grounded. But the nice bit of staying grounded is family and friends who treat you like a normal idiot, and tell you if you're being a bit too up yourself and make fun of you. And for friends who I've known for 30, 40 years, I've known them since I was 10, 11 for some of them. And so there is no, look at me, I'm a brain surgeon. I'm still the little kid who was friends with them when we were little. And so they can be abusive and keep me grounded as well.
Right. You mentioned about family, so I should ask you, did you at any point realize that the job would consume you completely? Like your wife says, you are completely your job.
Yes, well, I didn't realize it until I did neurosurgery, because not all parts of medicine consume you. There are jobs which you can do 9 to 5, you can turn the office key and leave and come back the next day. I think surgery in general, and certainly neurosurgery, does not allow you to switch on and off like that. You're constantly thinking about it and actioning it. And so I think once I started to do neurosurgery, it was increasingly obvious that that was always going to be a priority, maybe not the priority anymore, but a priority. And my patients probably are the priority quite a lot of the time. So when I met my wife, I was training to do neurosurgery. So, and she was working in the hospital. So she knew what that was going to be. And before we got married, when we were going out, it was regular that I would unfortunately let her down at dates and restaurant appointments and catching up, and then just not turn up, or turn up an hour late or even later. And it was before mobile phones. So if you didn't turn up after an hour, she would just get up and go. And she kind of, I won't say she accepted it, but she knew that was part and parcel of me. So I guess if she hadn't been able to accept that, we would never have carried on as a couple. So it's bad. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it's inbuilt.
Right. Look, I want to come to a little bit about surgery, because that's what you were leading. How do you prepare for an elective surgery? Can you share some details of how you get ready for that?
Well, there's two different parts. There's preparing the patient and their family, and there's preparing yourself. And preparing the patient and your family, for most cases, takes time. Of course, for many of our patients, they're more emergency, so you have to have that conversation very fast. That's more difficult for the families, because they don't really get a chance to think about stuff in too much detail. It's just kind of, it's there. But for the elective operations, it's very much about seeing them in clinic, examining them, talking to them, showing them the scans, explaining what's wrong with them. And if the kid's old enough, explaining to the kid as well what's wrong with them, so that they understand. And then telling them what you're going to do, usually in a different level for the child than for the family. You don't give the child all the details unless they're older. So, I wouldn't tell a 6-year-old there's a potential of all sorts of various risks, because actually there's no benefit in that. It's only when they're old enough to be able to decide whether they want the operation or not that we do that. And then you let them have a think about it. Usually takes a day or two, and then they come back to you with more questions, and then you plan it, and then you book the date. And then, of course, you talk to them just before the operation, and again go through it and make sure that they've got no new questions. So that's how you prepare them for it. And you have to be fairly honest about what's going to happen. Not to scare them, but because if you tell them what's going to happen and you tell them there's potential for complications, you also tell them about what you can do to fix those complications. What that means is, if the patient has one, then they say, oh, I do remember he said that this might happen and that it should get better over 3 weeks or 6 months or whatever. Whereas if you don't tell them and it happens, then you lose the trust, because they say, you never told me about this. And so once you've lost that trust, it's more difficult for them to believe you that things will get better over time. You see, so it's always better to tell people, because then you keep that bond together. And then the other side of your question was how we get ready. So It's looking at the scans, it's talking to my colleagues. We have a weekly meeting where we go through next week's operations and talk about them with each other to bounce ideas and talk about what I was planning to do. And somebody might say, well, have you thought about trying this approach rather than that one? And seeing what everybody thinks. And then the operation itself, you're ready for it. Now I don't have to sit and go through the books and learn all of the stuff for most cases, but sometimes you still do for unusual operations or rare ones. Mostly it's looking at the scans and just running through it in my head. So I go through step by step by step. I think about everything that could go wrong during the operation and then think, how am I going to fix each of these things that could happen? So I think about, I have a plan A and then a plan B and a plan C for each of these problems. And also it means that I can make sure that I've got the kit, the equipment that might be needed, not only for the operation, but what might be needed for the complications. So that I'm not having to ask for something in an emergency situation and everybody's running around. I make sure I've got everything ready. It's no different from if you go on a long car trip, you make sure that your petrol tank is full, you make sure you've got something to eat, and you make sure that your phone is charged. So you don't need any of those, but you make sure you've got it so that if there's a problem, you can ring for help, and you can make sure that if there's a traffic jam, you're not going to run out of fuel. It's no different from what we do every day, but you do it step by step for an operation as well.
Right. Doctor, you are a self-admitted grump.
Yes.
But the fact that you're able to make a difference in the lives of so many people should make you happy, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it does. It does. It's a term of fun, isn't it? Really, being grumpy. I am inordinately happy with how my patients do mostly, and even for the ones that don't do well, at least I think that I've done the right thing by them. But yeah, I think my natural setting is slightly grumpy because I'm always suspicious about what's going to happen to my patients. And in life, it means that I become fairly cynical about what can happen because we see, you know, the person who was late for a meeting and ran across the road without checking and they got hit by a car. And we see the guy who was walking home and got mugged and got assaulted for no apparent reason and has, you know, been left damaged. We see a very skewed version of life in what we do, and I think it makes us, probably neurosurgeons are naturally slightly cynical, and I think I'm just a bit of a grumpy person anyway, so that combination together, yeah, it's but of course, I mean, you've got to be an optimist to do this job. You can't be a pessimist because you'll stop.
Sure. Doctor, one area of your work is craniofacial reconstruction, isn't it?
Yes.
Babies or victims of accidents in normal life, so to speak.
Yeah.
Can you tell me an incident when you were able to change a child's life?
Well, to be honest, that's one of the things where I think virtually every operation it does. If we think about the children who have been born with very different facial and skull features, so parts of their head or the skull and their brain may be missing, parts of their face and their orbit and their forehead may be missing, and they can be essentially doomed to having a very difficult psychological life because they look so different, and also sometimes problems with their brain development and their function. So when we do the operations, we aim to try and help both of those. As a neurosurgeon, my aim is to help the function of the brain and give them the best opportunities to work and grow and learn and you know, get a job and be happy. But also completely linked with that is you can't be a person just by yourself. We all live in a society that judges us on a day-by-day basis, and part of that is how you look. So if you are born with a very large hole in the middle of your face, with no nose or no eye and no bit of your face at the front here, you've got very little chance of being able to have a normal life. Because even if you feel fine, and some of my patients with these differently shaped faces feel fine, and they, they're okay. And that's fine when they're little, and their parents love them. But then when they become teenagers, it's a very different story when they're trying to make social groups and make friends and meet people and meet a partner. And if they feel very different at that age, it's too late to make those changes. And so I think for almost all of those children who, in that part of my job, I think almost all of those children that we look after, we make a significant difference to their life.
You like to listen to music, isn't it, while you're performing intricate surgery? Iron
Yes.
Maiden and Talking Heads, among others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has it been something you have always been doing? And also, does the kind of music vary depending on the surgery that you're performing?
Yeah. So music's always been there. It's been a part of my life forever, and I find it hard to work without music. It helps me block out everything else around me, so it allows me to concentrate on whatever I'm doing. So if I'm operating, yeah, it's dance music, techno music, heavy metal, and sort of indie music. I don't like pop music very much. If I'm doing something very intricate, then it needs to be electronic or dance music without words, without any singing. So real electronic music, because that really does help me. Just everything else blocks out. So even when I'm working at home, if I'm doing reports and work at home, I have these noise cancelling headphones on all the time, like 8-12 hours. I'll sit at my desk and I'll have ambient music, so white noise or rain sounds or anything that doesn't take your attention away from what you're doing and blocks everything else out. So all of that kind of ambient sound allows me to concentrate and do better. So that's basically what I like to listen to all the time. I don't play ambient sound in the operating theatre because everyone else would hate it, because it literally sounds like you're like an engine or an aeroplane sound.
Right.
Yeah, but nobody else wants to listen to that. So I'll play dance music in theatre.
I see. I want to talk a little about your book, Doctor. Such a fabulous book. How easy or how challenging was it to write this book?
Well, of course, I didn't write it. I didn't actually write it myself. I did it in conjunction with a ghostwriter called Jeff Hudson. And what we did was we met up and sat and talked for maybe 4 or 6 hours at a go for 4 or 5 times. And we got to know each other and we just kind of talked, and he recorded and wrote. And I just told him stories and thoughts, and then we talked about stuff, and then he brought all of those things together. So there's and I know people do write books themselves, of course. Very busy people write books themselves, but if I'm honest, I didn't have the time or the desire to sit and write a book. That's not me. I'm not a writer, so I would never have sat and wrote this book myself. I kept a little diary of patients and interesting things from when I was a young trainee. So I always kept this diary of things that had happened to me or things that had happened to patients, primarily so I could look back if I had another unusual patient and learn from the last one. So I had a memory jogger, if you like. But basically, I talked and then Jeff wrote.
I love the tone that you bring in, and it is almost like the reader is right there with you in the operation theatre, looking over the shoulder almost. Yeah,
well, that's what I was hoping it was going to be. I think we had to cut some of the operation stuff out because they felt it was maybe a bit too gory in bits. But yeah, and when you think about those, you'll see that the journey that we take with our patients is not just the 6 hours in the operating theatre. It's the days beforehand and the days and sometimes years afterwards. And so I hope that people get the sense about how this is different from probably what most people think about surgeons, which is we just come and do the operation and go. And that might be the case for some surgeons, but certainly for us in pediatric neurosurgery, we have a lifelong contract for 20 years with our patients until we, have to transfer them to the adult care. But we have a very tight bond with our patients.
And surgeries itself, one of the longest surgeries you performed was something which went on for around 28 hours, isn't it?
Yeah, that's when I was a trainee with one of my bosses, yeah.
Can you tell me something about, share some details about that, doctor?
Well, it was a patient with an abnormal collection of blood vessels that had bled. So it's a vascular malformation in her brain, and my boss was going to take it out. And we did it on Christmas Eve. Yeah, so we started late, middle of the night. I'd not long moved to Glasgow. I didn't really know anybody. So I'd been there maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And we started operating in the early hours of Christmas Eve and finished on Christmas Day at about 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning. And he did the operation. I was only helping him, but we did it together fully. And then it was an extraordinarily exhausting thing. Yeah, it was amazing. But at the end of it, I was so tired and I wanted to go to bed. But he insisted that I come round his house for Christmas dinner. And I couldn't say no, even though, you know what, I really just wanted to say no and go to bed. But of course, you can't say that. So I went round and it was very nice. And it was a very nice Christmas day I had with him. But it was the level of concentration and fixed purpose, single purpose that you have to have for that long. Yeah, it was an unusually long one, that was.
How old was the patient, doctor?
Well, that was an adult patient because this is when I was a trainee.
I see.
So that was an adult patient. She was in her 20s, and I did it with my boss when I was a trainee. As a consultant now, probably 18 hours or so would be the longest, and those are for some very long tumor cases that we do. Now I'm getting a bit older, I tend to do that with one of my colleagues, so there'll be 2 of us doing it. A few years ago, I could probably have managed it myself, but now you get tired. So I get one of my junior colleagues to come and help me, junior consultant colleagues. So we take turns, and then we can take a break and go and have a sandwich and have a wee, and that's important for these time spans.
Doctor, you have 3 daughters. How has having children impacted the way you view patients?
It's good and bad. Obviously, not having children is all good, but the way it influences my patients, there's good stuff, and that really is the emotional support I get from them when I come home after a really bad day. To get a hug from them and just, it really helps when you are feeling really low. But it's really bad because sometimes you constantly worry about them all the time, and you see your children in your patients sometimes. So if I have patients who look or sound or are about the same age as one of my guys, then you can't help but think it's completely by fluke that this child is sitting here with a brain tumor and my child's at home having fun. And why, how is that decision to give one to one and the other to the other? How does that happen? And that makes you feel quite sad about the relative randomness of life. A bit like what I was talking to you earlier about, why I get a bit grumpy and cynical about things. But you really do realize that just a snap decision or a snap thing that happens changes everybody's lives. Yeah, and there's no purpose or sense to it. So yeah, that it can be a downer as well as an upper,
Right, right,
but mostly it's an upper.
right. Are your kids also following you in the same profession, doctor?
They're too young to know. They mutter about it, but also they see the hours I do, and they see how it leaves me, and I don't know that they're impressed with what happens to Daddy at the end of the day. So I don't know. I mean, I would love them to do it, but equally, I just want them to be happy and do something that's fun, and that they enjoy.
Enjoy it.
So if they're happy, awesome. But I wouldn't want them to be unhappy surgeons or unhappy doctors. I'd rather they be happy something else.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one step back, I want to ask you, what led you to putting down your thoughts in everything that makes us human?
Well, I was invited to do it. I'd done a couple of BBC documentary series. So we'd done 2 series of shows for the BBC about what we do at work, and they seemed to go down quite well, and they were quite successful. And then a literary agent contacted me and said, I saw you on TV. Would you ever think about writing a book? And initially I said, I haven't got time. I'm really chock-a-block. And he said, okay, fine, I'll get back to you. And then there was another author called Henry Marsh, who was one of my old bosses, who wrote a book that was very successful. And then David Riding, my agent, got back in touch with me and said, look, people want to have another book. Would you consider writing it now? And again, I was a bit more senior, so I had a bit more time. So again, I said, well, I can't write it myself, but if we can get hold of somebody to write it for me, that would be great. And then that's how it went. So it was not something that I had a burning desire to do. It was a fun distraction, but it's not like I've always had, I can't remember who said it, who said that everyone's got a book in them. But I never really thought that I had a book in me. Turns out I did.
Right. So is there another book in the pipeline, doctor?
I don't think so, I don't think so. I think what I like doing is doing different things. We did the TV stuff, and that was good, and it was fun, but it's done now. So I didn't want to go on and do more TV stuff. So we got asked whether we wanted to do more TV stuff. Not really. Written a book. It was fun. Done that. I'll see what's next. But I like to do little fun things. Just try everything.
Right.
So I'll probably try something else in the future. But I've got plenty to do.
2 last questions, doctor. You had several setbacks in your life, but you always managed to bounce back, isn't it? What kept you going, doctor? And what advice can you give? What tips can you give people who are down?
So honestly, it is who's around you. It is your friends and your family who I can't think of anybody that I've ever met who can do hard, difficult jobs by themselves and do it successfully for a long period of time. You might be able to do it for a bit, but you'll burn out. And when I read stories about people who've done much more amazing things, who've got through the most horrendous experiences in life, much worse than me, war zones and all very difficult things. When you read about how they got through it, none of them got through it by themselves. They get through it with their family, or they get through it with the support of their loved ones and their friends. And I think that's the most important thing that I would advise people is, if you're going to do, obviously these other people didn't get a choice, but if you're going to do a job that's difficult, or if you're going to make your life difficult with what you choose to do as a career, you need to make sure that you've got backup and you've got an alternate source of energy when you run out of your energy. So for me, my additional batteries are my friends and my family, and they recharge you faster than anything else.
Right. one last question. One last question.
Oh, I'm just going to, yes, I'm just going to, did someone just, sorry, yeah, I was just telling them I'll ring them back. Yeah.
Sure. Like I said, last question. Tell us about one failure of yours, or rather, not failure really, the first time you realized the surgery was not successful. How do you come to terms with it, doctor? Is it something you also learn at medical school?
No, you don't learn it at medical school. You learn it while you're on the job. Sorry. Yeah. You don't learn it on the job, and nobody teaches you that until you decide to. I don't know why they can't take this hint. Apologies. Right, I'm going to put it on silent for a minute. You watch other people, so you watch your bosses and how they cope. You listen to them think about how things went wrong and why things went wrong and how they cope with it and how they reason it out. You talk to your friends, your work friends in particular, who can support you through that. For me, then you then inevitably follow that by going out to the pub and having some drinks with your friends. And then you have to shoulder that and hunker on and keep going. And the things you have to do is remember that we didn't cause the disease. We try to help. And as part and parcel of that, of course, there are risks attached with the operation. So you have to constantly tell yourself that it wasn't you that caused the disease. You were trying to fix it and help it. And the other thing is you have to always remember that however bad we might feel, that it's always better to be the doctor than the patient. So you've got to remember that somebody who's had to go through it, and you have to then keep going for the next patient, because otherwise who's going to look after them? So it's that psychological building up of armor from yourself and from your friends and colleagues around you to learn how to cope. But nobody teaches it at medical school. It's only when you're on the job that you learn that.
How do you relax, doctor? What are your hobbies other than medicine?
PlayStation. So I'm a big gamer.
Music?
Movies. Quite a big movie fan. I started running this year, so now I'm running quite a lot, and that's quite good. And that's nice for an hour. I will listen to a history podcast or some kind of. I'm trying to learn something while I'm running, but I'll try and download something that's nothing to do with medicine. So especially history, I really like history, and trying to learn from the mistakes of the past. I guess it's a bit like being a surgeon in that way. Learn from the mistakes and see if you can do better in the future. So I'll quite often download those, and then I'll go for a run and just listen to something that's not to do with work and try and wash everything else out.
Do you do a lot of do you get some time to read?
I do. Yeah, not as much as I should. So over the summer, I read. So when I do read, I tend to read in a big orgy of 4 days of reading a book, and so I read Hilary Mantel's 3-part series.
Yes.
And I think I read that in about 2 weeks, just reading for hours every day. And then, yeah, so I will, and again, I like that one because it's got a historical tint to them. But when I do read, I like to gorge it. What I can't do is read a chapter and then read another chapter a week later, because there's too many things that have gone on and I've forgotten what's happening. But that's the same now when I watch TV shows. I have to watch I have to binge watch them. Yeah.
Have you been to Dubai, doctor? Have you been to the UAE?
I have not been to Dubai. I've stopped through it on the way to Malaysia to do some examining out there, but only at the airport. So I'm looking forward to it.
We are waiting to listen to you as well and meet you. I'm hoping to meet you in person here. Come on,
oh yeah, are you going to come? Okay.
I will be there. Yeah.
I hope it'll be okay. I think it's all going to happen.
What
Well, I've had the first part of my vaccination, so I've got. I'll be vaccinated by then. So I think it will be okay. Yeah, it's amazing, how what's happened in such a short space of time, but it just shows that when everybody puts their mind to it, you really can get stuff done working together.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I know your phone has been ringing.
Yeah, no, it's a bit annoying, that. Sorry.
Doctor.
You're welcome. All right, I hope I'll see you in February then.
I will hope to see you, Doctor. I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you once again.